Thank you for inviting me. I want to give special thanks to Sean, is Sean here, for introducing me to himself and Tigers for Tigers Coalition. I truly feel honored to be here among so many Tigers, and I'm very impressed with everything you're all doing and the heart that you put into it. And I hope today that I'll give you a few more ideas of where you might spend your energy if I get my way. So, how many of you are or have been undergraduates? Aha. And how many of you changed your major at least once? So when I was an undergrad, I started out majoring in forestry because a friend I admired very much was majoring in forestry. And then I met my college boyfriend who was majoring in urban planning, so I changed my major to urban planning. Before my junior year, I was fortunate to have an internship with a boss who told me I showed some talent for writing, and so I changed my major to journalism. During my first job after graduation, a volcano erupted in my home state of Washington and covered my newspaper's entire circulation area in ash. I was assigned to go talk to people in the shelters to see how they were doing, and I ended up with a front page story about how emergency services didn't have enough blankets and other basic supplies. The next morning, the director of emergency services was in my editor's office demanding that I be fired. Instead, the director of emergency services was fired because of what I had revealed about his shoddy work. And that's how I learned about the power that comes from simply telling people what's happening. Decades later, I wrote Blood of the Tiger for the same reason. The book is, it's not a wonky science book, it's a memoir, but it's a memoir that is also a geopolitical thriller about a Chinese plot to transform the king of the jungle, your mascot, into nothing more than livestock. And I know that sounds stranger than fiction, but it's true. I also wrote Blood of the Tiger because so many people tried to silence me on this preeminent threat to the survival of wild tigers, and because so many wildlife groups and governments have gone silent on the issue. I found my way to tigers thanks to two bears that I met in Bangkok, Thailand in 1989. They were both sun bears, which are the smallest of the 8 bear species. One narrowly missed being barbecued for Korean tourists, and the other lived in a tiny cage without shade at Bangkok's largest crocodile farm. Now, I could do nothing to help that little croc farm bear except ask her keepers to give her some water. But I promised her I would do everything I could to help her kind. That promise led me to discover that bears across North America were increasingly turning up dead with nothing but their gallbladders and paws missing. And that eventually led me across Asia to find the driving force behind the trade in bear parts. That's how I ended up in China for the first time in 1991, trying to confirm the rumor that bears were being farmed by the thousands and somehow milked of the bile in their gallbladders. But my Chinese government entourage was not keen on me achieving that goal, so we took a very long trip in a very small white van through the frozen countryside in China's northeast corner along the Russian border. I'll never forget, as long as I live, when my chief government watchdog said to me that China intended to farm bears like cows and pigs. That was the expression he used. While my head was still reeling from that statement, my entourage took me to a rickety old mink farm on the edge of a rural forest. The place didn't have bears, and I was very disappointed, but it did have a handful of tigers that were kept in rusty, old-school zoo cages. the staff there proudly showed me a handwritten ledger in which they were logging orders for tiger bone. I didn't know it at the time, but this was China's first tiger farm. And I did see bears eventually in bear farms, and this is what they look like. A few years after that, I saw tigers in the wild for the first time amid the ruins of a Maharaja's hunting reserve in India, Ranthambore. Some of you have been there. I watched a tigress take down a deer not more than a yard from the jeep I was standing in. Her vivid coloring was startling to me in the arid landscape. She, to me, was living art. I had never felt such majesty. Seeing her changed something deep inside me. A part of me went with that tigress as she dragged her kill back to her 3 ravenous cubs. I knew at that moment I had to do everything in my power to keep her and her kind from suffering the fate of bears on farms, to keep them free to roam the jungles and grasslands of Asia. There were less than 100 farm tigers when I first discovered there was such a thing in 1991. In 1993, under threats of trade sanctions from President Clinton, China banned all trade in tiger bone. That ban is still in place today. And yet China's farms now have 6,000 tigers, twice the number remaining in the wild. More importantly, some very powerful people are doing everything they can to lift that ban. Now, I spent 20 years trying to get a straight answer from the Chinese government about why it was okay for these farms to go from 100 to 6,000 tigers while that ban was in place. What I and others in the international conservation community did not understand until very recently is that China's ban did not supersede its wildlife protection law. That law, which you can read in English on the internet if you choose, mandates the farming and consumption of tigers and a long list of other endangered species. Today's tiger farms are basically feedlots for tigers, disguised as amusement parks, where tigers are bred like cattle for their parts to make luxury products like tiger bone wine and tiger skin rugs. So this is what tourists see. This is China's largest tiger farm in Guilin province in southwest China. This tiger is, for photo opportunities, if you take a close look, it looks, in my opinion, nearly dead, but it's certainly been beaten recently. And this is its chief role in life. Now, some of you may have seen circuses, but I don't know that anyone's ever seen a circus with this many tigers in it. What they had to do to get these tigers to do this is something I don't like to think about. You saw this slide last night, those of you who saw Sharon's talk. This is in the gift shop of one of China's tiger farms, and people are allowed to fill bottles of wine made from this tiger, steeping in this vat of wine, and take it home with them. And this is a Subway advertisement for the farm's tiger bone wine and bear bile wine. Again, there's a ban on trade in all tiger bone products in China. This is what tourists don't see. This is probably a breeding female who's kept alone while she's pregnant. Has her cubs. Her cubs are taken from her immediately, probably suckled on a pig or a dog so that she can breed again immediately. In the wild, she wouldn't breed again for another 2.5 years because she'd be with her cubs, teaching them how to hunt and how to be wild. You'll notice the ear tags. So aside from all the humane issues, the problem with tiger farming is that it stimulates demand for tiger products, which in turn stimulates poaching of wild tigers because products from wild tigers are considered superior, more prestigious, exponentially more valuable. Think of tiger bone wine as cubic zirconium and think of tiger bone wine from farms as cubic zirconia, and think of wine from wild tigers as flawless diamonds. That's approximately the mindset and the price differential between the two. Some people are now investing in products from wild tigers and also rhino horn and elephant ivory as they would invest in gold or rare art. They are basically hoping to bank on extinction. Extinction would make their investments priceless. So there are two parallel markets. One is aimed at stimulating a mass legal market if China reopens trade, and the other is an illegal market involving organized crime and catering to consumers hoping to get rich from the wild tiger's demise. The former recruits elite consumers for the latter. So if China reopens tiger trade, for China's 1.5 billion potential consumers, a tsunami of demand could quickly wipe out the last 3,200 wild tigers. Tiger farming started in the 1980s as a way to provide bone for the traditional Chinese medicine industry. It's really important to know that today, tiger farming is about wealth, not health. That is a wonderful phrase that Sharon coined, and I like to use because it really brings home the truth. Traditional Chinese medicine no longer uses tiger bone, and polls show repeatedly that a majority of Chinese people in China does not want tiger products or tiger farming for the sake of wild tigers, but also for the sake of their country's reputation. They do not want the blood of the last wild tigers on China's hands. A handful of investors, just a handful of investors, is poised to launch a multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry if China lifts its ban on tiger trade. There is no mass public outcry for tiger bone wine. This is about products looking for a market, not a market looking for products. Okay, so here's the good news, because I can tell you're all silent and dumbfounded and probably depressed. But here's the good news. China's news media recently reported that 35 delegates from the National People's Congress are calling for a revision of China's wildlife protection law this year, thanks to lobbying by a group of Chinese lawyers, scholars, and animal advocates who want to see the mandate to farm and consume endangered species removed. However, there are nearly 3,000 delegates to the National People's Congress, so the odds are not yet in the tigers' favor. But the seeds of hope are there, and they need to be watered. And I'm here today to tell you that you can provide that water. Do you remember how it was not okay a few years ago to talk about climate change in this country? Some of you may be too young to remember that, but essentially it was a forbidden subject. That is where the world is now with China's farming and the push to reopen trade in China. As China has risen economically and politically, and I had a front row seat to this, many fewer wildlife groups and governments, including our own, are willing to speak up against tiger farming, even though the United Nations Treaty on International Trade in Endangered Species decided in 2008 that it must stop. Some have been threatened into silence by the Chinese ministry promoting tiger farming. Others self-censor out of fear of repercussions from the government. What I fear is that the world may end up forfeiting wild tigers for the sake of geopolitical correctness and expediency to please China. But again, this is not what China wants. This is what a small group of people, businessmen and a small cadre within one ministry, want. So I encourage you to speak up for him and his kind, to make it not just okay but essential to talk about the threat to his survival from farming and the push to reopen trade in China. I ask you to speak up via social media and perhaps with letters, even emails, to the White House, to Congress, to China's ambassador to the United States. If you and others do not speak up now, the king of the jungle may soon be king of nothing more than the feedlot. When I told my husband my theme for this talk was how you all can make a difference, he rolled his eyes. He said, you know, when I was in college, so many speakers would tell me that I just stopped hearing it. He said that instead I should recognize that there are a lot of demands on your time. But it would be great if you could spend a little more of that time, and I know you spend time for tigers now, but if you could carve out a little more time for tigers and convince your friends to do the same. It's clear that your shared mascot matters to you. I wish this room was, 5 times as large and full to the brim, and I know you're working toward that. Thanks to social media, you can be far more powerful in your communications than I could ever hope to be as a journalist, even as an author. So I'm going to leave you with 2 ideas about how you can help stop the commodification of tigers and rhinos. Yes, they're farming rhinos now. Bears, and a long list of other endangered species slated to be farmed like cows and pigs. There are actually 54 endangered species on that list in China. As I said before, we need to make it okay we need to make it not just okay, but essential to talk about these matters. And you are in a unique and powerful position because you're young and people want to listen to you. So here's my first idea. What if you, as leaders of the Tigers for Tigers Coalition, started a social media campaign to discuss tiger trade with students from China? You could start at home with Chinese students attending coalition universities. They could then help you extend your reach to Asia. I'm talking about a respectful conversation based on a slogan that I am borrowing from Wild Aid: when the buying stops, the killing can too. Spread far and wide enough, that message could put the wild tiger's fate on an entirely different and more hopeful track. You could do that. My second suggestion is that you ask President Obama to consider signing a bilateral agreement with China on stopping all trade in tigers from all sources, similar to the bilateral agreement signed with China on climate change. China and the United States are respectively the number 1 and number 2 consumers of wildlife globally. Each has twice as many tigers in captivity as there are in the wild. Yes, the US has a problem with captive tigers too, and I know that Carson is going to be talking about that more later, I believe. Most Americans don't know that thousands of tigers are kept across this country in private hands, many for cub petting shows and other commercial purposes. Nobody knows how many there are, where they are, how they're treated, or what happens to them when they die. Do their bones go into the international trade? Nobody knows. More importantly, promoters of reopening tiger trade in China point to the United States and its tigers as an excuse for China to ignore the UN decision against tiger farming. So we are basically enabling China to tiger farm. So why not ask President Obama to raise the issue with President Xi Jinping when he visits the United States for the first time in his presidency in September? You have the collective power to do that. You can do it via social media, you can do it via emails to the White House, and via all sorts of methods that Sean will be able to make available to you because he is so well connected in Washington, D.C., and I'm serious. And I will then close with that thought, that food for thought. And I hope that I'll be able to talk with each one of you in the next few days, and that we can discuss other ways that you can use your power to simply tell what's happening to save your beloved shared mascot in the one and only place it should live, which is in the wild. Thank you. So, Sean, do we have time for questions? No questions? Sharon.
There was an undercover report by the Environmental Investigation Agency that came out last month that found that a Chinese company had used a special economic zone where they weren't paying taxes, and they had casinos. You could buy and eat any kind of wildlife, including, tiger meat, tiger skins, tiger bone, and there was the beginning of a tiger farm there. Do you know much about China now kind of exporting this model elsewhere?
Yes, that's a great question. There are,
It's across the border in Laos,
yes, that's in Laos, but there are the beginnings of tiger farms in, we believe, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, and other countries. And all eyes are on China. So that if China finds its way to reopening tiger trade, then you can count on these countries following, and that their tiger farms will then go into production of tiger bone wines, skins, etc. It's sort of a new economic model that China is leading the way on. But none of them is powerful enough on their own to be able to get permission to reopen trade. So it's all up to China, and therefore it's all up to stopping China if we don't want this to happen, if we don't want tigers to become livestock. Sean?
Great talk, by the way. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Could you talk a little bit about how we went from this shift of the perception of traditional Chinese medicine being the driver for demand to, the wealth thing? Can you sort of talk about how that transition occurred?
Yes, so in 1993, when China banned trade in tiger bone, they also took tiger bone out of the official medicine pharmacopoeia, and they stopped all manufacturing of medicines, and they forbid the buying, selling, trading of anything even purporting to contain tiger bone. And I was working for traffic at that time, and I was in China, and realized that a lot of the traditional medicine people really were still dedicated to using tiger bone. They really thought it was a great medicine for use in treating arthritic pain. And so what I did for most of my tenure as the director of Traffic East Asia was to enlist the traditional Chinese medicine community in trying to conserve tigers. And what happened during that period is that the industry globally, in China, in the United States, in Australia, in the UK, came to realize that because they wanted to grow their industry, they wanted traditional Chinese medicine to be respected and practiced alongside of Western medicine, they made a business decision that, that's not going to happen unless we stop consuming these species that the world loves. So it was a no-brainer for them, and they launched their own global campaign against the use of tiger products. So I would say that's when the legitimate use of tiger bone as a medicine stopped. And as the wealth started to grow among the Chinese business community, then there grew this interest in eating more exotic foods, drinking more exotic wines, etc., and that led then to where we are today. Up back there. All of the above. There are government officials who are involved in this. There's this Chinese ministry that's behind it, but again, they're mandated by law to do this, so they are carrying out the law as it is written. Even though the ban hasn't been lifted, sort of these products are getting out there, and a lot of them are getting into the hands of military officials and other high-level officials used as bribes and as gifts. The Chinese ministry that is promoting all this is trying to say that bans don't work, and that's why they need to reopen trade so they can flood the market. And it is my suspicion they're not cracking down on illegal trade because they want to show that bans don't work. And so we've got a situation here where the people who are in charge of enforcing the law do not see enforcing the law as in their best interest. And I just want to say, because I raised the topic, flooding the market with tiger bone wine from farmed tigers is not going to stop the killing of wild tigers, because there's that elite market who will want the very best, and they can pay for it, and they're willing to break the law to get it. Yes.
Of the market in tiger prices in the U.S., and is there anything the students here can do to address that issue with the matter of
Yes, and I think Carson will talk about that, and Bill is a wonderful person to talk to about that. Bill is in my book, by the way. Oh, no, he's not in my book, is he? No. He helped me with background in my book. Yes, there are many things that can be done, and in the news recently, there have been a lot of stories from different states that are now trying to ban sale of ivory and rhino horn, and I keep tweeting and Facebooking about, hello, tigers, because as horrible as the slaughter of rhinos and elephants is in Africa, tigers are far more endangered than African elephants and rhinos, and Asian elephants and rhinos are far more endangered. So I would like to see U.S. efforts include the Asian species, including tigers. That's one thing that can be done. Again, talking to these agencies, to Congress, to the President, about making this a priority on the international agenda. The United States led the way on this issue for decades and has recently backed off, in part because China holds our debt, much of it. I think it's the largest debt holder for the United States. We sell Boeing aircraft and all sorts of goodies to China, and we buy a lot of products from China to stock our Walmarts, etc. So I think that people have become afraid that if they upset China, that somehow the U.S. will suffer, and I don't believe that's true. I believe China needs us every bit as much as we need them, and so I think it's very important on all levels to get the United States to take a stand on this issue. But again, I would encourage focusing on the captive tigers in the United States, because really we don't have a leg to stand on if we have a captive issue that is just as big as China's. Sharon, do you mind if I...
Okay, yeah, there's a
Okay, the gentleman back there.
Love your talk, love your book. And
Thank you.
for being here. Just wanted to sort of throw in, you talked about sort of the United States government. Tomorrow we'll have Brian Arroyo, who is head of the international side of Fish and Wildlife. I think it's very open to hear through Fish and Wildlife on this. And they've been increasing their support of wildlife and really, I think, much better understand the demand side of this versus our friends in the State Department.
Yes.
And so I would encourage you to bend Brian's ear tomorrow about this. And as part of that, the students here, not only the president of Mamba, I would throw in that the Southeast is the powerhouse of the United States Senate. And
point.
Those senators could be key in a lot of this because I think generally they're very pro-trade in China and do not understand that their mascot is in real trouble from some of their policies. I think this room would have a lot of power in describing Mr. Graham if you truly think you're a tiger and you're going to take these actions. So thanks very much.
Thank you. I think that's a brilliant comment. So you have even more power than I was even thinking. You're absolutely right, and I really hope that you will use that power in the way that was just suggested. Sharon.
One of my two questions plays on that. I'd like you to talk a little bit about the proposed legislation to regulate tigers in the U.S. And that is something you specifically lobby your representatives about. And secondly, I also wanted to hear a little bit about the extent of the tiger skin trade in China.
Okay, I'm going to defer your first question to Carson because she's the expert. So when she talks, I think she'll address what's going on with that legislation, which is amazing, a great opportunity. And with regard to skins, I talked mainly about bones because bones provide the driving force for poaching wild tigers. Skins are sort of the opposite in that the skins from the skins are actually less expensive from wild tigers than from farmed. They're not quite as nice. But then we still have, parallel markets, right? We have one feeding off the other, same thing. But the other thing about that, and I think this is what you want me to say, is that the Chinese government, this ministry within the Chinese government admitted at a recent CITES meeting that it has, in fact, reopened trade in tiger skins to some extent. That's as far as they've gone in admitting domestically. Yeah, is that what you had wanted me to say?
I hear that, tiger skins are a commodity that we're buying.
Yeah, I mean, yes, people want them for their homes. And I have to say, and I know we're out of time, but a few years ago I was in China and I was talking to a bunch of young Chinese and they were talking about how all these people in the US and other fashionable places were wearing tiger skin clothes and leopard and everything, and they didn't even understand that it was faux tiger and faux leopard. They thought it was real, and they really wanted that. And these things are highly desired for up-and-coming Chinese for their homes, those that aren't aware of what's going on. But I want to say that there are large numbers of Chinese, particularly young Chinese, who know what's going on and oppose it. And just remember that a majority of them I always want to say are, majority singular. A majority of them is with us. We're on the same page, and that's why I would encourage you to consider some sort of communication to get some sort of global campaign going here to speak for the majority of people on Earth, I think, who really would rather see tigers wild rather than as luxury commodities.